Welcome. You may have noticed the context object we are using in our step definitions. So it is actually a way to pass information and manage the test execution. In this session, let's talk more on what the context variable is and how it is used in different scenarios, and we will also see some examples. So what is the context variable? The context variable is a built-in object and is behave specific. Okay, it allows you to share data and state between step definitions within the same scenario. It is actually a special object in behave. It acts as a container to pass data and maintain context throughout the execution of our behavior-driven test. It allows us to maintain state and context, and this makes it possible to pass data between different steps like our given, when, and then, and without using the global variables or our function arguments. The context variable object can be used to store variables such and share information and helps during interaction with our application under test. How we use it? Well, you can add attributes to the context object in one step and then you can access them in your subsequent steps, but it should be within the same scenario. Okay, so there are a couple of things here. One is this initialization. So in the given step, you can use the context variable to initialize any data or object which is needed for that particular scenario. And then this data can be modified and accessed in our subsequent steps, but within the same scenario. Again, this is especially useful when you need to carry information from one step to another and perform actions or make assertions. The context variable, as we know, in behave allows us to store and share various types of data. Okay, so this data can be actually primitives. So you can actually store and manipulate primitive data types such as integers, strings, or floats and booleans in the context variables. So these values can then be used to represent and manipulate simple data within your test. So you can see an example here using the primitives, how you can store an integer. You can store it using context.num and then you can assign that value. You can also store objects and other complex data structures of Python. So this context variable can actually hold more complex data structures, including dictionaries, lists, and other custom Python objects. This is useful when you need to pass or share structured data between different steps. You can see an example of storing a dictionary here. So context.userinfo, and you can see it we are storing a dictionary name and age. And same thing, how you will access a dictionary, you can access it. Okay, but you need to prepend the context dot with your actual variable name. In our case, it is user.info. Apart from this context variable can also store functions and methods. In some cases, you might store functions or methods in the context variable, right? Especially when you want to define reusable behavior or actions that can be invoked across multiple steps. So you can define a custom function. For example, as you can see here, we have defined calculate_square, and this is actually a function, and then you will store the function in the context variable context.calculate_square, and then you can provide the name of your function calculate_square without the braces, and then finally you can use it. Okay, so context.calculate_square, and then you can pass in some value here, and then your function is going to be executed based on the call. So finally, to use data stored in the context variable, as we have seen, you can access it within step definitions using the dot notation. So in all these examples in the screen, what you see here, context dot is there, right? So you can use this dot notation here. We'll see more examples with this context because this is one of the important feature of behave that is actually really helpful for writing our test. So that's about the theory of this context variable. Let us look into an example of working with context. I know that you have already seen how to use context object in our earlier examples. We will try to reinforce the same thing here, but we will be using a dictionary with the context object, and also we will use the background feature of Gherkin, which we have talked about in our previous session. Okay, so let us go ahead and try to create our feature file first. So here, create inside the features folder. So in the features, right click and we'll do a new file, and I'll name it as context_var.feature. We are trying to create a feature file. and let me add the feature definition and calculator operations. Okay, we'll see simple operations so that you are able to learn the concept of the behave and BDD and other things. If I try to make complicate the examples in here, then you will be more concentrating on understanding the examples rather than trying to concentrate on the BDD or our behaves features. Okay, so that's the idea of this course, understanding the behave and BDD. So we are also going to use background, and we will write a given step in here. So in the given step, I will write I have a calculator. So this is our given, and I will have only one background step here, given I have a calculator. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, we will be initializing our calculator in this background step. So the background is typically used for such kind of things wherein you want to initialize something for running all your tests in the same feature file. And let me quickly write down the first scenario here, and then we'll try to write down our step definition functions. So this is our scenario adding add two numbers, and when I enter numbers 3 and 5 and I press addition, and I should see some result on the screen. So trying to mimic a calculator in here, and in the background we already have a defined calculator. So we are going to initialize our calculator in our background step, correct? So let us go ahead and try to write our step definition function. So inside steps, and we'll create a new file, steps underscore context underscore var dot py. Okay, let's split this thing, right, and we will move this feature file on the right hand side, and we'll try to write our Python on this one here. So we need to import, right? So let us do the import first. Import from behave, import our given, when, and then. And we first need to write our background step definition. So for our given, I have a calculator, I should be initializing our calculator in this step definition function. Well, it is the same thing how we write our other given, when, and then when we are writing for our scenario. So let me just write it down in here. And given I have a calculator, and it's a function which we need to write. Same thing, def initialize calculator, and then context we are using in here. And for our context, we will initialize a calculator, and here we will use a dictionary. So let us try to see using a dictionary with our context object. Okay, so for our dictionary calculator, which we are going to initialize, we will initialize the result only. Then we'll put something like 0 to an initial. This is an initial state of the calculator. So whenever our test scenario, the test case, our test scenario is going to run, it is going to get a clean state calculator whose result is reset to 0. Okay, how many times you run, it's going to have this given step, and it's going to reset it to 0. That's the use of this given in the background state, where we define a calculator and set it as in the state of initialize it to a 0 value. Okay, the other things which we need to write are pretty similar, which we have already seen earlier for our when, and then step. So let me quickly write our when step. Okay, so this is our when step, when I enter the numbers 1, and we are using parse here, D you can see here, and same for the num2 as well. So it's going to take the numbers 3 and 5, which you can see in our scenario, and enter numbers, context we are using, and then num1, num2, which we are taking from our scenarios or step definition. Okay, and we are again using the context variable here, context.num1, context.num2. So it all there, after running this function, it is going to have 3 variables, context.calculator and num1 and num2, context.num2. So all these variables are available for this scenario. So when your scenario is running, it's going to get all these variables, and you can use these variables, this dictionary, context.calculator, and all these other numbers, num1 and num2, it's going to be available for all our step definition functions. So that's the main use of the context, which we have been seeing throughout our other examples. Next thing, let me write down the AND step, and I press the addition button. Okay, so and I press the addition button, press add button, and we are using the context in our argument, functions argument, and context.calculator, which was already defined in our background step, given I have a calculator, in this function, and then we are using the result key, and we are trying to add up the two numbers which we got in our when step in our scenario. Enter numbers, context num1, num2, and we are adding it up and putting it, restoring it in our result of the calculator dictionary. Okay. Next thing, we need to finish our scenario by writing the then statement. And now this is the final step. The result should be expected result. Expected result should be 8, correct? And we are using the parts D, you can see here, and then on the screen. So assert context.calculator result, which we have done in our previous session. Press add button, and then we are trying to assert against our expected result, right? Expected result is we are getting in our then definition. The result should be 8 on the screen. Okay, so that's about the test scenario for adding two numbers, and we are done with all the step definition functions, and we are also using the background. I have a calculator. So let us try to run this one and see that works fine. So we'll click on this play button and try to scroll up, and you can see that add two numbers are passed. And if you go to the output also, you see one feature pass scenario, 4 steps passed. 4 steps. Remember this 4 steps in here. So in our scenario, we have 3 steps, correct? But it is showing 4 steps because you can see the background given I have a calculator is also considered while we are running our tests. Now, when I ran this scenario, I was just trying to run this scenario at two numbers. I didn't click on the full feature. Here is another option of running the full feature file, right? I didn't use that. I just ran this scenario, but behave automatically finds that there is a background to be run, and it ran that one given statement, ran it. Now, if I see the output also, scenario at two numbers, you can see here given I have a calculator. So it automatically runs it. Behave will identify it that there is a background to be run, and it will automatically run that for us. So that's part of the behaves features, correct? And of course, it's going to help us during running our tests. And you might be having a single background for multiple other tests in your same feature file. For every test, whenever it runs, it is going to run this background once, okay, before running your test. Okay, so that's about it in this session about context variables. Okay, so that's all. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.